That's not noise. She's still in there. Miss Hayes.
I tracked her autonomic swings all night.
Please look.
The imaging is definitive. The cord is transected. We don't treat patients on hope, Miss Hayes. On evidence. Stick to your charts. The ones you're assigned.
The autonomic instability doesn't match a complete injury. It matches shock. I've seen it before. And where would a night nurse see that?
Around. Stick to your charts.
The monitors said the girl would never walk again. Dr. Harrison Gable said it too, in a voice smooth as the watch on his wrist. And everyone in that room believed him because he had letters after his name and a reputation that filled hospital brochures. Everyone except the night nurse standing in the corner with a clipboard she wasn't looking at. Abigail Hayes watched the 14-year-old's hand where it lay on the white sheet, and she saw something no monitor was built to catch. A tremor, a flicker in the smallest finger. Not spasm, not reflex, intention. And 11 years of buried knowing came roaring back up her spine, because she had seen a body play dead before. She had seen it lie, and she had learned, in a place with no monitors at all, how to make it tell the truth. Her name was Abigail Hayes, and at 38 she had made herself very good at being invisible. She worked the overnight shift on the neurology floor of a civilian hospital that sat a short drive from the Naval Medical Center in San Diego, close enough that half the doctors had trained on military dollars and none of them liked to admit it. She wore scrubs a size too loose. She kept her voice low and her opinions lower. When the young residents talked over her in the hallway, she let them. When Dr. Gable swept past without meeting her eyes, she stepped aside like furniture. She had spent 11 years teaching herself to take up no space, and most days it worked. Most days there wasn't a governor's daughter dying quietly in bed for. Chloe Caldwell had been in the passenger seat when the truck ran the light. Her mother's car had folded like paper. The mother walked away with a broken wrist and a guilt that would never set. The girl came in on a board with her spine screaming and her legs gone silent, and by the third day the word had hardened around her like a cast. Permanent, complete, nothing below the injury. Dr. Gable had said it to the governor himself, in the family room, with his hand resting kind and heavy on the man's shoulder, and the governor had nodded, because what else does a father do when the expert tells him the world has ended? But Abigail had read the chart. She had read every line of it, twice, standing under the flat white light at 2 in the morning when nobody was watching. And the chart was wrong, not the facts. The story the facts were being forced to tell. She stood by the bed and looked at the girl, 14. Someone had painted her nails a soft pink before the crash, and the polish was chipping now at the edges, a small, ordinary vanity from a life that had a week ago been whole. And there, at the corner of the girl's slack jaw, a thin line of tension held, the kind of set a face makes when it is bracing against something. Not the face of a body that had let go. The face of a body still clenched, still fighting, still in there. Abigail had seen that jaw before too. The girl's blood pressure crashed and spiked in a rhythm Abigail knew. Her heart raced and stalled without cause. Her skin flushed and went cold in waves. To Gable's team it was noise, the meaningless static of a broken machine. To Abigail it was a language. She had heard it before in a canvas tent, with the wind throwing sand against the walls. Heard it from a boy of 19 whose truck had rolled over a roadside device and who everyone swore was paralyzed for good. Autonomic shutdown, they'd called it later. The body, overwhelmed past the edge of what it could carry, pulling every system inward and slamming the doors. Spinal shock wearing the mask of spinal death. She had watched a medic bring that boy's legs back in 40 minutes. She had watched, and then she had learned to do it herself, and she had done it more times than she could stand to remember before they told her the technique was too dangerous, too unproven, too far outside the manual. They had a word for it now: banned. Abigail set down her clipboard. She looked at Chloe Caldwell's face, slack and gray and 14 years old with its chipped pink polish and its stubborn clenched jaw, and she thought about her brother. Daniel had been a ranger medic. He had taught her the reset himself, on a leave that felt 100 years ago, drawing the pressure points on her forearm with a ballpoint pen and laughing when she got them wrong. He had used it on men in the worst places on earth, used it when the fancy protocols said give up, and some of those men were alive right now with children who would never know his name. Daniel had died 3 years ago, not in any war, just a road and a rainstorm and bad luck. And Abigail had buried her only family and folded her whole history into a drawer and taken a job where nobody would ask her what her hands could do. Now here was a girl, and here were her hands. She almost walked away. That is the part she never told anyone afterward, that she almost turned and finished her rounds and let the experts be right, because she knew what happened to nurses who touched a patient in a way the chief of neurology hadn't ordered. She knew Gable. She had watched him destroy a resident's career over a misplaced comma. If she was wrong, she would lose everything, and she had already lost so much that everything was a small pile now, but it was hers. Then the girl's finger moved again, and a voice that sounded like her brother's said, low and certain in the back of her skull, "You already know, so do the thing you know." Abigail closed the curtain around bed 4. She did not do the reset that night. She was not reckless, whatever they said about her later. What she did was gather proof, because a woman like her needed proof the way a drowning person needs air. She sat down at the nurse's station and she pulled every scrap of Chloe's data and she built a chart of her own, by hand, tracking the autonomic swings against the clock. By dawn, she had a pattern so clean it made her hands shake. This was not a severed cord. This was a cord in shock, alive underneath, waiting, and every day they treated it as dead was a day the door swung shut a little tighter. She brought it to Dr. Gable at 7 in the morning, before her shift ended, because she was a fool, and because she still believed, somewhere, that a doctor would rather be right than comfortable. He looked at her pages for 4 seconds. She counted them. "Miss Hayes," he said, and the way he said "miss" instead of "nurse" was its own small knife. "The imaging is definitive. The cord is transected. I understand the emotional temptation to see hope where there is none, especially with a case this public. But we don't practice medicine on hope. We practice it on evidence." He slid her handwritten pages back across the desk without touching them, using one finger, the way you'd move something unclean. His watch caught the light. "Stick to your charts, the ones you're assigned." "The autonomic instability doesn't match a complete injury," she said. "Quiet, steady. It matches shock. I've seen it before." "Where?" he said, not a question. "Did a night nurse see spinal injuries?" And there it was, the door he was daring her to open. She could have told him. Combat medic, 2 tours, more spinal shock than his whole career had touched, a technique she'd used with her own hands to give men back their legs. She could have laid it all on his desk. She looked at his watch and his soft, clean hands, and she understood he would not believe a word of it. Worse, he would believe it and resent her for it, because the field was the one thing his letters could not buy. "Around," she said. He smiled like she'd confirmed something. "Stick to your charts." She could have stopped there. Most people would have, but Abigail Hayes had carried a 19-year-old boy's returning heartbeat in her own 2 hands, and she had never once learned how to unknow a thing. So she went over his head. Not to the governor, not yet. She wasn't a fool about power. She went to the one person left on earth who might understand the language she was speaking. She dug through an old contacts list she hadn't opened since the funeral, and she found a name. Dr. Eleanor Croft, military neurologist, the woman who had studied the very phenomenon Gable swore didn't exist, who had written the papers the manual ignored. Abigail wrote her a letter that night with the handmade chart photographed and attached, and she wrote it plainly. One field medic to one field doctor. No begging, just the data and one line at the end. "I think we're about to leave a live cord for dead, because it's easier than being wrong. Tell me I'm the one who's wrong." Croft called her at 4 in the morning. "You're not wrong," she said, and Abigail had to sit down on the supply room floor because her legs had stopped holding her up. "How fast can you get me in that building?" But getting Croft in the building meant getting past Gable, and Gable owned the building. When the request came through official channels for an outside consult, He killed it in an hour. Not his call to make. He claimed it was patient stability, chain of command, the family's fragile state. He was very good. He wrapped his refusal in concern for Chloe like a blanket over a cage. And the hospital administration, terrified of a lawsuit and in love with his reputation, folded behind him. Abigail stood at the window at the end of her shift the next morning, coffee going cold in her hand, and watched a long-term transport van pull into the loading bay 2 floors below. Nobody had told her in so many words, but she knew what it was for. They had scheduled Chloe for transfer to a facility, a gentle word for the place where they send children to be still forever. The van would come back for her in 2 days. Once the girl left this building, the window Croft swore was closing would close for good, and everyone who had signed the paperwork would get to sleep at night, because the paperwork was easier than being wrong. Abigail set the coffee down. She turned from the window. She did the last thing she had left. She stopped protecting herself. She waited for the governor to come for his evening visit, the way he did every night, sitting by his daughter's bed with his tie loosened and his whole enormous power useless in his hands. And when Gable wasn't there, Abigail stepped inside the curtain, and she did the one thing invisible people never do. She made him look at her. "Governor Caldwell," she said, "my name is Abigail Hayes. Before I was a nurse, I was a combat medic, 2 tours, and I've seen your daughter's exact condition on a battlefield floor more times than I can count. It isn't what they told you, and I think we have about a day left to prove it before it becomes true." He was a politician. He had a face built for not reacting, but his eyes went to hers and stayed, because a father drowning will listen to anyone who isn't lying, and she was not lying, and he could feel it. "Dr. Gable says the cord is severed," he said slowly. "Dr. Gable has never had a man slip away in his arms because he trusted a scan over a heartbeat," Abigail said. "I have. There's a doctor named Eleanor Croft who studies exactly this, and Gable has blocked her from the building 3 times. Ask yourself why a man so certain he's right is so afraid of a second opinion." She watched the question land. She watched it do its work, because that was the crack in Gable's whole fortress, and she'd finally found it. Not the science, the fear. A certain man does not bar the door. The governor made 1 phone call. That is what power is for, on the rare good day. By midnight, Dr. Eleanor Croft was standing at the foot of bed 4 in a rumpled coat, a woman who had clearly slept in her clothes and slept little. Her hands, the first thing you noticed about her, blunt and scarred and sure. She looked at Abigail's handmade chart the way a thirsty person looks at water. "You tracked this by hand," she said. "Nobody gave me a machine that would." Croft's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Show me the girl." They examined Chloe together in the low light, 2 women who had learned medicine in places with no brochures. Croft ran the tests the manual didn't have. She pressed and watched and waited, and when she straightened up, her voice had gone rough. "Incomplete," she said. "Spinal shock over an incomplete lesion. The cord's alive under there, and it's been screaming for a week, and nobody was listening." She looked at Abigail. "You know what it needs?" Abigail's heart went sideways. "It's banned. It's unapproved," Croft said. "There's a difference, and you know it. I've watched it work. I've written the papers they wouldn't publish." She glanced at the governor, standing white-knuckled by the wall. "Sir, I'm going to tell you the truth the way nobody in this building has. What we're about to try is outside protocol. It carries risk. It also may be the only door left before your daughter goes somewhere no door opens. I can't promise you anything except that we won't leave her for dead because the paperwork was easier." The governor looked at his daughter's still face for a long time. Then he looked at Abigail, the night nurse, the invisible woman, and he said, "My son wanted to enlist, Chloe's brother. He said the ones who count are the ones who show up when it's ugly." His voice broke on the last word. "Do it. Show up." Abigail rolled up her sleeves, and then, for one long moment, she did not move. She stood over the girl with her hands hovering above that small clenched jaw, and every fear she'd folded away for 11 years came back and stood beside her. If she was wrong, the child paid. If she was wrong, everything. She let herself feel the full weight of it. because you should feel it before you touch someone's life. Then she breathed out, and her hands stopped shaking, and she found the first point the way you find a light switch in a room you grew up in. She will not tell you exactly what she did, and neither will I, because it belongs in the hands of the ones trained to do it and nowhere else. But I can tell you what it looked like. It looked like a woman remembering. It looked like her brother's ballpoint pen on her forearm and the wind against the tent and 40 minutes in the worst place on earth. Her hands moved with a certainty her whole quiet life had hidden, precise and unhurried, reading the girl's body the way she'd read the chart, listening to what the monitors couldn't hear. Croft stood at her shoulder, watching the numbers, calling them soft. The autonomic storm on the screen began to change. The wild swings gentled. The doors that had slammed shut a week ago eased, 1 degree at a time, back open. And near the end of it, in the gray hour before dawn, Chloe Caldwell's leg moved. Not a twitch, not a reflex. Her knee bent, slow and deliberate, and her toes curled against the sheet, the chipped pink polish catching the low light, and the girl made a small sound in her throat that wasn't pain, and her father put both hands over his mouth and folded in half in his chair and wept without any sound at all. "Hey," Abigail said gently, leaning close to the girl. "There you are. I told them you were still in there." That was the night everything Abigail had built to protect herself came down, and she found she didn't mind. I want to stop here for just a breath, because I know some of you have been holding yours the way I was when I first sat with this story, and I only want to say thank you. Thank you for staying in the quiet with these people. If the overlooked ones, the ones who carry knowledge the world refuses to hear, mean something to you, then you already belong here. Stay with me. There's a little more to tell. Dr. Harrison Gable heard about it the next morning, and he did what men like him do. He tried to bury it. He wrote it up as spontaneous recovery, the body healing itself, nothing to do with any unsanctioned procedure by an untrained nurse, and he moved to have Abigail suspended for practicing outside her license. But he had made one mistake, the same one he'd been making her whole career. He had assumed the invisible woman was alone. She was not alone. She had Eleanor Croft, whose military credentials no board could wave away. She had the governor, whose daughter was moving both legs by the 3rd day. And she had the chart, the handmade one, the one Gable had pushed back across his desk with a single finger, dated and timed and predicting exactly what would happen. He had handed her the proof himself. The board did not need long, and the next morning Dr. Harrison Gable walked out through the lobby he used to sweep through like a king. The residents who had once parted for him stayed where they were. The nurses did not look up. He crossed the whole wide floor and nobody stepped aside, and the watch on his wrist did not buy him a single inch of it. Abigail wasn't there to watch it. She was in Chloe's room, where she'd asked to stay on as the girl's nurse through recovery, teaching a 14-year-old how to feel her own feet again, one slow morning at a time. The governor found her there. He didn't have a speech ready, which for him was rare. "They want to give you a commendation," he said. "A ceremony." Abigail shook her head, tucking the blanket around Chloe's warming legs. "I don't need a ceremony. What do you need?" She thought about her brother and his ballpoint pen, and all the men walking around with children who'd never know his name. She thought about 11 years of taking up no space. "I need this hospital to start listening to the people who've been where the manual doesn't reach," she said. "The ones who've had a life end in their hands. We know things you can't learn from a scan. That's all. Just listen to us." The governor nodded slowly. "That," he said, "I can do." Chloe Caldwell walked out of that hospital 11 weeks later. Slowly, with a cane, leaning on the nurse who never left her side, Abigail had learned, in a canvas tent a lifetime ago with the wind at the walls, that a body will always try to tell you the truth, if you get quiet enough to hear it. And she had gotten quiet enough. The girl knew her name now. So did her father. And so, by then, did a whole state full of people who had learned something about who to trust when it gets ugly. But it was the walking that mattered. One careful step, and then another, out through the doors and into the light. These stories are made with love. If this one stayed with you, subscribe to the channel. That is all I ask.